Hello, I'm Ryan Frick, the business librarian for the Columbus Metropolitan Library System. I'm based in the Business and Nonprofit Resource Center at Main Library here in Columbus, Ohio. The Business and Nonprofit Resource Center is a co-working space where customers can access all kinds of resources that they need to successfully build and run their business or nonprofit organization, from computers with software like Adobe Creative Cloud to subscription-only research databases with all kinds of information that small businesses or nonprofit organizations need. We also provide access to librarians like me and a large number of community experts who provide free one-on-one support to library customers. The Business and Nonprofit Resource Center also provides lots of free classes and events to help small businesses level up their skills, make connections with other business owners, and access the information you need for your business or nonprofit to succeed. The resource we're going to discuss today is accessible to you with your library card. Any Ohio resident is eligible for a library card at the Columbus Metropolitan Library. If you need one, you can easily apply online and get your digital access number instantly. Just be sure to write it down when it pops up on your screen. Once you have your card, it's time to navigate to our website, www.columbuslibrary.org. All the resources we're going to review can be found by clicking on the Adults tab at the top of the page and then selecting Business and Nonprofit Resource Center at the bottom of the menu on the left side of the screen. This will take you to the web page for the Business and Nonprofit Resource Center. If you scroll down on our web page, you'll find a calendar of our events, the option to meet one-on-one with a librarian, or access our business planning tool called LivePlan. Most importantly, for today's discussion, you'll find buttons that say View Resources. Today we'll be discussing business resources, so we'll click the View Resources button next to Business. From there, when you scroll down, you'll see all the resources listed in alphabetical order. Today I'm going to be showing you a resource called SimplyAnalytics. This resource is a powerful web-based tool that allows users to view data in many different ways, including shaded maps, tables, and a variety of graphs. It also has geography-based reports with consumer market segment data, consumer spending habits, and demographic data. So to get to SimplyAnalytics, once you're on our business resources webpage, you're going to want to scroll down. And remember, if you're ever on a page and you see these different bubbles with different subjects in there, that is a list of subjects where we have digital resources available. So in our case, we've selected business, but we have a variety of resources covering many different subjects. So we're on the business page now. We're going to scroll down all the way to SimplyAnalytics, and we're going to click on Access Now.
So if you're accessing it from home, it's going to ask you to log in with your library card and your PIN number, but then it should bring up this page here. So once you're at this page, you have two options. You could sign in as a guest. That's what I'm going to do today, but I recommend clicking Create an Account. And this way, if you create an account, you'll still always have to go through the library's website to get to SimplyAnalytics for free. But you'll be able to log in and your work will be saved. So you can save multiple projects. This resource is a little bit more complicated, and I do recommend just creating that account. That way you can build on what you do each session. But I'm going to sign in as a guest today and click Sign In. So it's going to first start up here with a sort of introductory video. I do recommend watching that little tour, but I'm going to go ahead and click on out of that for now. And so we're going to get started with a new project here. So the first thing it's asking us for is at least one location for us to examine. So if you watched the other video on reference solutions, I was using the example of building starting a business that is a donut shop. So we're going to keep using that example for some of our searches throughout this video. And what we did in reference solutions, we found some target zip codes. One of those zip codes was 43230 in Columbus. So I'm going to go ahead and use that as one of our locations. I am going to also add Columbus. And I believe the resource always defaults to having US, just like the country as a whole in here. I'm going to add Ohio as a state, and then I am going to just type in USA. I think it automatically adds that, but I'll add it just in case. So once we've got some locations, you can just do one if you want, but I like to have some comparisons, and you'll see why in a few minutes here. So I'm going to hit next, and this will start us out here now asking about some seed variables. So you can pick however many of these you want. You can actually also pick none of them if you want, but I do recommend picking a few that you think might be useful. For this example, I'm going to pick these 4. Total population, educational attainment, this median household income, and per capita income. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit create project. So once it loads here, we see a map of that zip code 43230. And so what we're going to be able to do is, in some of the future sections of this video, we're going to go in more depth about, where do people live in this zip code? What are their income levels? Maybe we have our target age range for our target customer demographics. Where do they live? And how many people fit into that target demographic? And what's their, how much money are they spending on certain products? Other things like that. We're going to delve into all of that in future sections of this video. But this first section, I just want to make sure that everyone has an idea of how to create different views to look at this data in really cool ways. That's one of the great things about SimplyAnalytics, is it creates lots of different ways to view data. So we open up on this map here. I'm going to talk about the map a little bit later. I'm actually going to start with the comparison table. So the comparison table is one of the basic views in SimplyAnalytics, and it's really important to understand how to change that around, to edit it, and just basically get very comfortable using it. So we start out by seeing at the top here the 4 different locations that we set, and then on the left-hand side, the 4 seed variables that we started with. Now, if we want to know more about these seed variables, which these are all fairly easy to understand, but there is some data that maybe it's a little confusing. If we want to learn a little bit more, we can left click on them, and we see a couple options here. Sometimes we will see add other years. So if we wanted to see a projection for 2029, we can select that, and it added it here, total population 2029. So that's a 5-year projection there. We can also click on this view metadata, and we'll learn a little bit more about this data that we have here. So age is defined, sex is defined, and then this source agency. It's always good to know, where's this information coming from? Well, a lot of the stuff in SimplyAnalytics is going to come, a lot of the specifically demographic data is going to come from the U.S. Census Bureau, American Community Survey data, and that Puerto Rico Community Survey. That's because they do those surveys in the years between the census in 2020 and 2030. That data is definitely going to come from this American Community Survey. So we can close that. So I was able to add one line of data here by clicking on this and adding other years. If we want to add more data to this, since we have just created this project, the best way to do it is to look through the data tables here on the left-hand side. If we had been working for a while and finding other data in other views and wanted to add some of the data that we had clicked on already, those would be available under View Actions. So with any of the views I'm going to show here, you're going to want to remember that you can click on View Actions and do a few things here. We can hit, the main thing is that Edit View. By editing the view, we can then get rid of data points or locations that we don't want in that view. Now, once we've been working for a while and we've selected something like other income levels or housing information, things like that, this data section here will be much longer. So we can add and subtract from different views by clicking on View Actions, click on Edit View, and then select the data that we want. Either we want or we want to remove. So I removed that just for fun. So now we're back to our original 4. And that is generally how this view works, how the comparison table works. If you want to export it, you can click on Export, and it will give you the option to pick a few different formats here. You can use an Excel file, whatever you want to do there, and then it'll just download that for you. So the next view that we're going to look at here is the Quick Report. So it does the same thing here, where at the top we have our 4 columns for our locations, and then on the left-hand side we have our data. Well, our data titles there. So it defaults to this demographic overview. This is a great, just standard thing to run whenever you're using SimplyAnalytics. You're going to want to run a demographic overview. So for our zip code here, we now have our population numbers broken down by sex, and also age numbers, race, ethnicity, household income levels. They're all in this basic quick report. What languages are spoken there, education levels, all of these things. So very basic, good report to run. I'm going to also show here, I mentioned if we've looked at other data, pulled other data, that it can show up in that View Action section there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on a few of these age ranges here. So now we've selected these 3 by clicking on that plus sign. Now, if I go over to Comparison Table and I now click on View Actions, Edit View, these data sets here, this for the total number of people between those ages and the percentage of people for those ages, all popped up here. So I can now select all these, hit done, and now they show up in our comparison table. So that's kind of one way that you can add more data. If you're in a report and you see those plus signs, that's just going to be a quick way to add that to whatever reports you want. Now you can also come up here to this View Action and Edit View, and in this case it's only going to let us limit the number of locations that we have in our report. So we'll just keep it like that. So other things you can do with the Quick Report. There are 2 other types of reports. The PRIZM report, which I'm going to have a section later in the video where I go much more in depth about PRIZM as a as a product, what PRIZM reports are, and they are essentially their market segment reports. I'm going to talk about those and Mosaic reports, which are both available here in SimplyAnalytics. But that's the way that you would pull a PRIZM report. And here there's also a housing detail report. So this will just tell you what is the general housing makeup of each of these geographic locations. We can even see things like housing median gross rent numbers, other things like that. So could be really useful depending on what your business is or other purposes that you might have there. It could be pretty useful. So the next view we're going to look at here is the map. So this is definitely the premier view for SimplyAnalytics, and it might look a little complicated, but generally speaking, it's not too bad here. So what we're seeing in the yellow outline there is our zip code here, 43230. And currently it's mapping out one of our seed variables, the total population in 2024. And so it's letting us know where people live in this zip code. And what we're seeing is it's shaded based on this sort of scale over here, this key over here. So we see this sort of swath across the middle here. That is where there is at least 5,369 people living in these shaded areas here. based on the census tracts. So we can do a few things here. We can click on Edit, and we can actually come in here and we can change the color scheme if we like. We can change the thickness of some of these lines here. You'll see they get a little thicker there, some of the gray lines. We can also change the color if we want. That one might be a little confusing with the outline of the zip code there, but we can also come in here and change the scale. So sometimes you will find that you can kind of break the scale if you mess it up a little bit. But let's just say we wanted to. I'm just going to see if I can do something here, make these a little more even. Let's say we specifically wanted areas with more than 5,500 people, right? Now we set that scale a little more evenly, and we still see that this area here still fits our target there, and then down at the bottom. So we can also come up here, we can switch to different variables, and you see all the stuff that we've been working with, it now pops up here. So we can look at that per capita income. We can come in here, we can do the same scaling if we want, the same color. We can do things like we can switch to Columbus and see that same variable mapped out over the entire the entire city there. We can come to Ohio. I think if we do it at Ohio level, it might switch it to counties here, and we can see that same variable. So that's how this works. We can switch these things here to get different data mapped out visually with that shading. Now, we can do the same thing where we come over here to Edit View. We can make a few edits to these different sections as well. Edit View, it's kind of the same thing where we can go ahead and map that data. In a minute, we'll do a business search where we can also map out where businesses are in the geographic area we're looking at. And we can also add other data. So we'll do more of that later, but that is generally how this works. Now, one of the cool things is that we can also export this. So if we like this map, I'm going to switch this back to that total population. Let's say we really like this map. We can go over to Export, and we can now sort of create our own little map here. And the cool thing is we can go to Layout, and we can adjust things if we want. It's set up pretty well. It looks pretty good. There is this scale here. We can move the scale if we want. We can just leave it there, and then we can actually export it as a PNG file. It looks really nice, and we can put that in, a slideshow if we need, or something like that, or put it in a business plan, something like that. And it's just a really nice feature that they have there. So the last starting view that we're going to look at here is a ranking. So this is pretty simple. What this does is it takes the seed variables, in this case that we've started with, and it will rank them based on each set of data. So in this case, we're starting on the zip code here, which means it needs a smaller area, so it's going to give us census tracts. There are 17 census tracts in that zip code. We can also switch this to block groups, which is the smallest data set that's available in SimplyAnalytics. And it'll take a second to think here, and there's about 41 looks like census blocks in this zip code. So you'll see this bottom one. Sometimes you will get data there's no data in this. Now this is probably because this is either an unused census block, or it's something like an airport or something like that, or a park. It could be something where there's no people and no data available. And you will also just sometimes find data that it will show up for some places and won't show up for others. That's just part of working with any kind of database. So we can come in here, and if I switch this back to census tracts in this zip code, and we want to sort this, we can left click on it, and we can sort here from largest to smallest. So we know now that this census tract 007209 has the highest population in this zip code. And we can do the same thing here. We can sort by this, education attainment. And now we can see that this census tract in zip code 43230 has the highest level of percentage of bachelor's degrees or higher. So we can also do a few things here. Same thing, we can go to this view actions, we can edit view, we can add more information here. We can switch the rankings to look at, whatever other geographic areas we want to look at, and those other data points as well. That can all be done under the edit view. And we can, of course, come into this data, these other data sets here, and add more data that way as well.
So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about using SimplyAnalytics to look at demographic data for whatever geographic area you're focused on. So we're still going to be, as we were in the earlier video, we're going to be focused on the 43230 zip code in Columbus, and then we will be able to make comparisons to Columbus and the rest of the country, comparing the same data across those different geographic areas. So I'm on the map view right now. I'm actually going to go over to the quick report, and it's going to automatically be set to pull the demographic overview quick report. This is really the ideal place to get started on demographic information. It's going to pull it for any location that we have selected. The great thing here is we can customize this by moving around the different geographic areas to whatever makes sense, however you want to compare it. And we can scroll down through here, and we're going to get a pretty good overview of all the demographic statistics that we might want here. There's a lot of stuff that's not here as well, and I will show you in a minute how to look at other data that you can add to other tables and other views. But we get housing, citizenship, languages spoken at home, educational attainment, income levels, race and ethnicity, age statistics, and then just a total population statistic broken down by sex. And that's all here under this demographic overview. If we wanted to add more locations to this quick report, we could come over here and we could come in and add maybe another zip code for Columbus, and we can slide it into place however we would like there. And now we can easily compare those multiple zip codes. We can add Cleveland if we wanted. We could add, states, things like that, and easily make a comparison across these different geographic areas. Now, if we want to look at data that is not included in this demographic overview report, I like to look at it in this comparison table. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to look over here on the left-hand side where we have all of these different categories of data. One handy thing is if you know kind of what you're looking for, you can do a keyword search, and it will give you results that are related to those keywords. You can also browse by all these categories, and you'll see a lot of these are related to what I would generally just call like demographic information. You can view it in the category view or in this data folder view. So we have community demographics here, this Census Bureau data here, crime reporting, things like that. But these top two sections are really what I would consider would be more, especially the community demographics, election data, the census data, community survey, American Community Survey data. That's all stuff that I would consider to be really useful demographic data. So you can select things from this section. There'll be kind of this folder view where we can see things broken down by population or sex or age, all that kind of different types of statistics. But if we go in on the category view, let's say I want to look at some more information related to population. So I can click on population, and anytime you're in this view that pops up here, there's a really a little bit confusing but really ultimately very useful function for this is we've selected population, and there's hundreds and hundreds of statistics related to population that we see in this menu that we can scroll down. Now, let's say I want to know about the number of men between the ages of 25 and let's say, 35 in my zip code. So the cool thing is I can come here to population, and now I can select age because I want to know something about ages, and I can click on gender because I know I want something to do with gender. And so this number has decreased to just things related to population, age, and gender. So there's 3,435 data points related to those three things combined. If I come down here to just male, it cuts it down to 1,162. So that is a way for you to sort of shrink the data down to just what you want. We could do that further if we wanted to know something specific to race or ethnicity or immigration status. We can really narrow that down to just the potential data that we might want. So now I had said men between the ages of 25 and 35. Well, here this will work for us, 25 to 34. We can click on both of these points. You see now they've been checked. When I close this, they now pop up in this comparison table for me. So now I've got the number of men between the ages of 25 and 34, and the percentage of our zip code that are made up of men between those ages. Now, if I wanted to add those two data points to other views, because I was in the comparison table when I added them, it automatically adds them to that view. Now, if I want to add them to, let's say, you can't add it to the quick report, but you can add it to the map, for instance. So when I come up here to look at my data, it actually automatically shows up here in the map. If for some reason you do not see that data listed in this dropdown, you can come over here to View Actions and Edit View. So what we see here is any of the data that I've been clicking on, so the zip code that we added earlier, and other data here, so this number by age and percentage sex by age, we could click on that and add that. In this case, it already added it automatically, but in our ranking, it is not here. So our ranking view does not have that. If we want to add it, View Actions, Edit View, and now we'll select those and hit Done, and now we have those two data points now in this ranking view. And if we had any of the other views, it would most likely have to do the same thing where you have to click on View Actions and then Edit View to add that data. So again, it's helpful often to look in this comparison table as a great starting point because usually it is helpful to compare data points between your focus zip code areas or focus cities just to see how does that compare, because it's hard to say what is 7.84%. Is that low? Is that high? It's hard to know. And here we find out that it's lower than the average for Columbus in general, but it's a little higher than the country as a whole. So Columbus has a higher percentage of men between ages of 25 and 34 than the U.S. in general has. So it's kind of an interesting data point. So one more time, just so I can make sure it's easily understandable. The key thing here is that when you're selecting, we had focused on demographic information in particular, but anything you select from this section, from the data over here on the left-hand side, it will function where you can layer your data information, your type of data, and as you layer that, it will shrink down the number of options so that you're getting just what you're actually looking for. So we have race and ethnicity. If we have selected this, but we want to know income levels too, we can select that, and it will shrink it only to things that are related to race and ethnicity and income. And again, if we come down here, we can select specific race or ethnicity. So if we come down here to, people who are identify as 2 or more races, it's going to shrink it down to just the options for this. So if we want to know the household income level for people who I have identified as 2 or more races, we can actually find just that statistic, and it just shrinks that down for us. If we want to go even more narrow to men, again, well, there we go. It's down to only 97 options for us here, and so we've kind of shrunk down those options down to just what we actually might be looking for. So that's how that data selection works. We've been focusing on demographic data specifically, but it will be the same thing for other data selection, data categories, where you'll be able to just shrink that down by layering your choices in those checkbox sections. In this section, we're going to look a little bit at how to pull market segment data in SimplyAnalytics. So consumer market segments are generally proprietary systems for classifying the households in the United States. And so there are many different products that exist for this, all made by different companies. But in SimplyAnalytics, we have 2 major ones to look at here. And so the first one we're going to look at is PRIZM reports. So PRIZM is a product made by Claritas, and we're able to pull that data in SimplyAnalytics. And so we can look at all these different segments that they've come up with. So these are households grouped together by characteristics such as their income, where they live, right? Whether they're like an urban household or a suburban household, the age range of the head of household, their purchasing behavior, all these kinds of things. Claritas took all of the households and then just divided them up according to this identifying information. And so we can actually pull a PRIZM report pretty easily in SimplyAnalytics. So we're still looking at the 43230 zip code, and we can come to a quick report here. And one of the basic 3 quick reports is a PRIZM report. So what you see is these urbanicity categories, and then a breakdown of different types of segments underneath that. So what this means is this is the highest level of looking at this is the highest level of PRIZM's system. So we see PRIZM Premier Urban Households, Suburban Households, Second City Households, and then Town Households. So that is a very high level look at these segments. And you'll see, because we are, of course, looking at either Columbus, which is obviously a large city, or a specific zip code of Columbus, we're not going to see some of these segments represented much, right? We don't really see much in the way of town households. In fact, it's only 1.5% of Columbus, but it's 40% of the US. So it's highly represented elsewhere. It's just not going to be represented here in Columbus very much. And then we will see this second city and suburban households represented highly. And in our zip code, we're not really going to see, we really only see 2 households that must fit into this urban household really high group. So because we are in the suburb, that's what we're going to see mostly. And so we want to then look at, we'll see there's 0 represented in these urban uptown and urban midtown. These are subsections of the urban households segment. So we're getting a little bit more narrow there. Urban cores, also nothing represented. Once we start getting into these suburban households, this is where we're going to see a lot more households represented in our target zip code. So underneath here we see households social level is elite suburbs, so that's this here. As a whole, that's 5.64% of our zip code. And then underneath there, we have 3 subsegments. So this is going to be much more narrow, and we're going to see that if you were to add up the household numbers for those 3 subsegments, That's how you're going to get to that 1,402 total households in elite suburbs. And it's going to be that way for other groups of the suburban level and then further down into the second city level. Now, you may be wondering, okay, what does any of this mean? What is the value of this? And so to learn more about what these segments mean, you can do a couple things. So from the quick report view, you can definitely come in here and actually click this plus sign. So we see that almost 30% of our zip code is in this suburban S2, the affluentials level. We can select that. Just like any other data point, that is now a data point that we can add to our views over on the right hand side. We could do that for each of these if we really wanted to, and then we could pull a comparison table or whatever we wanted to do with that data. We now have selected it. So we can come into that comparison table, we can click on View Actions, Edit View, and now we can come in here and those things that we clicked on here, we can actually just click Select All and click Done. Now they're in this table with us, and we've selected at least a portion of the PRIZM reports that we want to know more about. To learn more about them, as with any other data point, you can click on it and then click on View Metadata. And we get a little bit of information here. So we get the definition of the affluentials here. We get what these subsegments are. We find out that this is a Claritas product and it's from the data set of PRIZM Premier. So it gives us a little bit of information. If we want to know about one of the lower levels here, segment 6, view metadata, we get again a little bit more information. So we find out here that households that fit in segment 6 winner's circle are wealthy, they're older, and they definitely, most of them have kids. The way that this is broken down, most of that segment are people who have kids. They're between the ages of 45 and 64 for head of household ages, and they live in subdivisions. Usually around the area there's going to be parks, golf courses, higher end shopping, and they have a median income over 100,000. So this is definitely, as the name suggests, the affluentials, this is definitely a more wealthy suburban household. And there's some descriptors here that will give us a little more of an information about them as well. So it's 1.7 million households in the US fit into this category. Pretty small, with only 1.36% fit in this category. They're likely to do these things here. They'll drive an Acura. If they're shopping at fast food, it's going to be a little higher end fast food like Chipotle, things like that. They shop at places like Express. So we kind of get an idea generally of who they are. A little bit of their demographic traits. But if we want to get even more information about who these groups are, how to read this product in a lot more detail with a higher skill level, we can come over here to Support and go to Data Documentation. So this section is going to be really your friend in a lot of different ways, but especially while reading these more complicated data profiles here for especially these market segments. Under Claritas, you'll start to see PRIZM show up here. There is a lot of PDFs available to read about PRIZM. Primarily, I find this Premier Segment Narratives section to be pretty helpful. And I also like to pull the segment storyboards. That methodology could also be pretty useful. I'm not going to look at that right now, but this PRIZM Premier Segment Storyboard is a slideshow that we can look at here. If we wanted to look at the group that we were just looking at, this affluentials, we could scroll through this, but we can also do like a Control F and kind of find where are they represented in here. So there are several aspects to this product. One is lifestyle segmentation. So what we see here is that the affluentials in that lifestyle segmentation fit in the social group for suburban, which I kind of talked about earlier. So that is their social group. Within that, we see things like winner circle, gray power. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Executive suites, cruising to retirement, etc. All of these listed here. Now, if we want to look at those more specifically, we can come down here and we could do a search for them. We could scroll through. I'm just going to keep affluentials as my search term because we see here a winner circle. We see two things here. We see the family life that they're in. They're in the life stage group F1, and they're in the social group S2. If we go back up to that first page, we see these life stage groups here. So when we look at this, we see life stage group F1, accumulated wealth. If we look back here in this, we see that winner circle is listed here. So these groupings will fit in both of these. They will fit in a life stage group and a social group. So we can look back at lifestyle, winner circle again. And this is where we can kind of get like a better breakdown of who this group is. So if we want to know that they're mostly 35 to 54-year-old couples with large families in new money subdivisions, they are, spending money on things like their car, clothing, stuff like that. We find their tech usage, they're above average on using tech. Many of them have graduate degrees, and they're in management or professional careers. So we get this breakdown here. And so kind of helpful to get an idea, okay, if this is a large percentage of your target zip code, then you need to know who they are. You need to know a little bit about what they're interested in, the kind of income level they have, and it might give you some ideas about how to market to them more. So if we're going to stick with this winner circle as our target here, we can come over to that Premier Segment Narratives PDF, and we can go ahead and search for winners. In this case, for some reason there's an apostrophe this time. There wasn't in the other one. So we can find instances of that mentioned. And so here we see they're listed again under that F1 accumulated wealth, which we kind of already knew that. But we see it's arranged here from higher income households to lower income households. And here, again, we have a grouping here. So we learn more about the family life. So family life F is composed of segments that are middle-aged and either defined by presence of children in the household or have high indices for households with children under age 18. So they either have children or they're very likely to have children under the age of 18. They may be married couples or single parents, etc., etc. So you can learn more about this here, and each of the different segments are listed here underneath that. So if we scroll down further, we're going to find out about the other segments of family life, but ours is listed in the accumulated wealth section. If we go further, we'll find other descriptions here. So this is just more about the premier social groups, the affluentials here, instead of the, this is the social groups as opposed to the lifestyle groups. Here we have that under the affluentials, as we saw earlier, and the other groups that are also under there. And then we have a little bit of a narrative here. So winner circle, wealthy middle age, mostly with kids, a little bit more information about them. It kind of is repeated here as well. It's just in a kind of another format. So that's the data documentation on PRIZM. I would recommend, under that Claritas section here, I would recommend looking at these different notes and methodologies. You may find a little bit more information about how this product works. Could be super useful. But in general, this is a type of product to learn more about your target customer. So ideally, you're going to glean some deeper information. They are sort of these are products that work for this group of people in the country as a whole, right? They're not unique specifically to Columbus. We see they're grouped this way in, Winter Circle or whatever subgroup. They're grouped that way across the country. So it is not going to have the very narrow descriptions, things like race or ethnicity or other things like that, that we might be able to glean more information by looking at the demographic breakdown of that zip code, which we can do using some of the other tools in SimplyAnalytics. So, it's not a perfect tool, but it is one set of data for learning more about your potential customers and for how to shape your marketing using some of the information that you find. Okay, in this section, we're going to look at a second type of consumer market segment data product. For this, we're going to be looking at Mosaic segments. So before we pull any data, we're going to go up to the support section into the data documentation, and we're going to scroll down here so we can find some information about what the Mosaic product is. It is here under the Simmons Mosaic USA section. And so we have 6 different PDFs here with information on how to use this product, how to read this product. But before we look at any of that, I just wanted to read this section here. So it says that Simmons Mosaic USA is a household-based consumer lifestyle segmentation system that classifies all U.S. households and neighborhoods into 71 unique descriptive segments organized into 19 overarching groups. So we see there's 90, right? So 71 descriptive segments with 19 groups that they fall under. And so we'll see in a second, but those 19 groups are lettered A through S, and then you'll see A1, A2, etc., all the way down until S something, which will be S71 would be the last one in that system. So when we look at the data in a minute, you're going to see that there's 180 data points for Mosaic, and that is both the number of households and the percentage of households. So 2 data points for each of those 90 segments. Well, really there's 71 segments and 19 groups. So like what we looked at with PRIZM, this classification is based upon similar income, buying habits, age, household composition, and life events. So that's how they group these down into these segments here. So the helpful things to look at here, all of these are probably helpful in different ways, but we're definitely going to want to look at the Product Guide 2023. What this does is this describes a little bit more detail of how they compile these segments. And as we go down a little further, we'll see a list of this. You see A, Power Elite, and then A, 1 through 6. Those are the subgroups that fall under A, Power Elite, and so on, all the way down to S71. So basically, we're going to be looking to see which of these groups are represented in our geographic area that we're focusing on. And then we're going to be able to dig into further what that means. Who are, B flourishing families, B07 across the ages? Who are those people? What is their age breakdown, their income breakdown, housing, and even a little narrative about them, just so we kind of know more about who our potential customers are. So that was the product guide. And a couple of these are kind of duplicating a little bit, but the group and type list is also very helpful. This is actually a breakdown of, we see that same listing, but if we go down here, now we're going to get just the narratives on each of these. So there's a narrative section that is included in each report. We can actually look at them, both the letters and then the number sort of subgroupings as we scroll down through this. It's 118 pages. If we want to look at I believe it is the handbook here. yes, the handbook. As we scroll down, we see some other graphic about how this works. But now we get into the full, the sort of graphic view without that narrative, and it's the same thing for everything here. So it's both this graphic view of everything and then further data on that subgrouping. But there's another way we can access those. And then the last thing here that is definitely helpful is this icon key. So this will actually kind of tell you how to read these reports when we pull them. It will explain what the different graphics mean, these symbols, these channel preferences, things like that. So it's going to help us learn more about how we actually should be reading these things. So I'm going to close out of that, and I'm going to show two ways to pull this data. Here we are still in this focus zip code of 43230. We also have Columbus and the US pulled up here, and I'm currently in a comparison table view. So one way to pull this data, which is not necessarily the way I would recommend, but I still wanted to show it, is you can come down here to, if you're selected on data and you come down to market segments, you can scroll down here, and we have all these, life stage groups, social groups. These are subgroupings of, generally it's going to be the PRIZM segment, which we talked about in an earlier video. And that's how this life stage groups, segments, social groups, those are all three going to pull PRIZM products. Technology is going to pull a different type of segment data, market segment data, that is specifically related to technology usage. It's kind of a different type of product and not something that I'm going to cover in this video, but it could be useful if that's the type of product that you're selling. But if we click on Mosaic, like I said earlier, we see 180 data points. If we come down to data type, they're split evenly between count and percentage. So right here we see this Mosaic group called aspirational fusion, which we see a number and a percentage. So those are the two data points for each of the 90 different groups and subgroups that we're going to see here. For some reason, SimplyAnalytics does not list the letter with the Mosaic group here. If we go down to the segments way further down here, we will see the letter and the number for the actual Mosaic segments. For some reason, the groups don't have them listed that way. If you want to see that, so if we want to see what aspirational fusion is, what letter that is, we can click on these three dots, click View Metadata, and when we scroll down, we learn a little bit about these market study reports. But we see these should look kind of familiar. We find that aspirational fusion is letter R, so it's that will be the Mosaic group R. Underneath there, we see that there's an R66 and an R67. So those will just be subgroupings of that R. We can also access the rest of the data in this fashion as well, and we can get to that narrative. So we can simply select, some of these. We can select all of them. If we really wanted to do it that way, we could select each of them one by one. And if we close that, they'll pop up in the comparison table that we are currently on. Or if we were on, the ranking, it would populate that as well, or map. If we want to do this in a little bit quicker way, we could actually come to New View and come to this related data table. So the related data table will let us select one of these and pull everything related to that into one table. So we select. Now we're going to get number or percentage. We can't really select both in one table. We would have to pull a second table and pull the percentages. I know that can be a little annoying, but that's just how this function works here. This view works. So we're just going to select the number and click click done. And now what this pulls is the number of households in each Mosaic group. So our largest one here, quite a bit larger than the second largest, is this singles and starters. So if we want to click on this and then come to the view metadata button, we can click on this and see who this group is. And so this is group O. And there are 5 subgroupings of O listed here. We could dig more into this and figure out just exactly who this group is. We probably are going to want to do that if that's our target zip code. But for now, I just wanted to show that's how you can pull all of those so that we can figure out which is the largest one. Now we know that group O is probably something we need to look more into. If we wanted to then pull a different type of related data table, create a new one, and we went to this data again, market segment data, we can go back through it this way. We can also do a search here as well. But in this case, I'm going to scroll down. I want to pull, I know it's I know it is O50 something. We know that for sure. So if I just wanted to pull the number, I also want to grab percentages later for these O groupings. It's actually going to pull not just the O, it's going to pull all of the Mosaic segments for our zip code here. So if we want to pull, let's do percentage, because the raw numbers, maybe sometimes that's not so helpful. Percentage is nice. So we're going to pull all of the Mosaic segments, the percentages of households in our zip code here. So I click done. And so now we find that 5.92% of our zip code is actually in a different one. It is here in this suburban sophisticates. Now we do see O represented pretty high as well. And I'm going to assume that we see, yeah, 051, 055. There's definitely a lot of households in that, but here we see J34. So if we want to know who are the people that make up this group, we can click on this and click View Metadata. So now I'm going to dig a little more into how you read these. I'm not going to go into every single, every single data point on here. But specifically for this suburban sophisticates, we see a little bit here, just one quick kind of sentence about them. They're established sophisticates living comfortable suburban lifestyles. So not surprising they show up in this, as this is a suburb of Columbus that we're looking at. What we see in these gray boxes here are the largest grouping, the largest data grouping for each of these questions, essentially. So if you were to say, what's the average head of household age? The largest group of that head of household age is in that 66 to 75. And it's the same for each of these other ones. We're also seeing these key features here. This is a group that is largely retired, financially secure. They're likely to be, AARP members. They have a single-family home. They probably own a home, and we find out a little bit more information about them there. We also see technology adoption here. This is an older group, a little bit not as skilled necessarily in some of the technology, and then we do also see their channel preferences. So keep in mind that this is their likelihood to respond to advertising through these channels, and this is based on a index rating. So an index rating of 100 would mean that they were average. So they're not likely to respond to television, texting, email, social media, or even radio, but they are more likely than average to respond to physical mailing. So if this was a segment that you're really trying to reach out to, there's at least one set of data here that suggests that doing a traditional mailing campaign with physical flyers, advertisements, could be successful when reaching out to this group. One thing to keep in mind as well is that these market segments are nationwide. They are describing these people across the entire U.S. So you do need to, sort of transpose some of this onto what we know about Columbus, and specifically our zip code that we're targeting. But in general, it does give you a nice data point to make some decisions for your marketing and other things like that. So these other two sections here, I won't go into this one very much, but this is, again, these are index ratings. So compared to the country as a whole, they are much more likely to be in that 66 and older range, as we see it, because it's on the right-hand side there. People don't fit into this group if they are under that age, essentially, especially under age of 51. Largely because that deals with things like they are retired, they live in the suburbs, and they own a home, things like that. Things that a lot of the younger head of household age they're less likely to fit into those categories. So that's kind of what this is here, just more data about them. And then as we look at the last page that's included here, sometimes you will get a total of 4 pages, and that will be because the narrative portion, which we're looking at here, sometimes that will go over to a second page. So we find a little bit more about them. Sometimes this can be helpful just to get some ideas of maybe a little bit more, just a narrative about them, a little bit more about who they are. And sometimes it does have a little bit of information about maybe how you should market to them. But in general, just learning more about your target customer could be enough to inform you on maybe some things to include in your marketing. And this will be available for each of those segment types. So in general, that's the most useful way to access Mosaic segment data through SimplyAnalytics, just to pull related data tables, and then you may have to pull multiples of them, export them, and maybe a little bit of extra work to copy and paste this into a single document, but it is much faster than going through and clicking every single market segment and then creating tables on your own. So in this section of the video, I'm going to cover a little bit about how to research consumer expenditure data. And to do this, we are going to use primarily a comparison table. So we're going to use some different data sets and create a custom comparison table with consumer expenditure data for our example business, which is going to be a bakery, and we're going to be in the 43230 zip code. So we've already got that set. So we're going to go to the comparison table. And one of the things we can do is we can click on the view that we're using, and we can rename it. So consumer expenditure research is what we're going to name it. So we've got this custom table here. And currently we just have some seed data that we picked for the total population and the median household income. But we want to add some more data specific to things that we might be interested in having in our bakery. So the first set of data we're going to look at is we're going to do a keyword search for donuts because we're interested in making donuts. And there's a lot of different things here in our data set, but the first thing that we're going to use is actually this consumer expenditure estimate for food at home related to cereals and bakery products. And we actually see two things here, this sweet rolls, coffee cakes, and donuts, and the same thing, but a household average. So I'm actually selecting these two because many of the consumer expenditure numbers are going to be these two types. And when I close this, you're going to kind of get an idea of what this is. So that first number there, that did not say household average, this is the total amount of money spent on that product in that geographic area in the year listed. So in 2022, in the 43230 zip code, there was $1.253 million spent on sweet rolls, coffee cakes, and donuts, which if you divide that by the number of households in that zip code is $49.13. So that would be if every household bought the exact same amount and spent the exact same amount of money on that product, it would have been just under $50 per person. Now, I added Columbus, Ohio there so that we could basically have a comparison. So now we know that a little bit more than Columbus as a whole, that our target zip code spends more money on that than Columbus, the average Columbus household spends. So there's a few other data points that we might be interested in here. I guess we should also point out that this is $2 more, or about $1.50 more than the U.S. average. We can come in here, and another thing is that in my bakery, I'm going to also maybe I'm going to have coffee. So we can just search for coffee, and we see here there's a coffee and coffee household average. There's also, interestingly enough, a roasted coffee distinction. I'm not exactly sure why, but that would be, we're going to see that is going to be a more specific label for that there. So I'll close that. We've got this added in here as well, and so we see 4.2 million spent on coffee at home, a 167 per household average, right on line with the U.S. average, and then 2.5 million spent on specifically roasted coffee. Now, I don't exactly know what that definition is, but it is part of this 4.2 million. So this is not necessarily that important, but it does show maybe this is considered to be a little bit more premium coffee. I'm not entirely sure. But we did pick that up as well. And if I also search the word bakery, for instance, you're going to see a few different things here. There's this cereals and bakery products, food at home, a few other interesting things here. Let's go down to this bakery products and bakery products household average. And there's more specific things as well. So we could look at cookies or white bread or other types of bread. But for now, we're just going to grab this bakery products, and we'll scroll down. And again, we'll see here 15.7 million spent on bakery products in 2022, and a household average of $616. So we're pretty much in line with the U.S. average, but we're a little high for Columbus. So that's not too bad. If we're considering having a bakery there, we at least know they do spend some money there. So one other type of consumer expenditure data that you might find while digging around in SimplyAnalytics would be brand-specific data. So, for instance, we do know that there's Dunkin' Donuts in this zip code. So since I know that, I can actually find some information about how often people go there. And you'll see a lot of this is broken down by 7 days, maybe 30 days, 6 months. I'm going to try to see here what their traffic is, the volume here for the last 30 days. So number of times, I'm going to see what this volume number is here. Yeah, so we see this number for 16,678. So this is an estimate for, in the last 30 days, the number of people who went to a Dunkin' Donuts in that zip code in the last 30 days. So again, we have an idea of how much traffic is happening for, even though we're not necessarily going to have an exactly the same kind of business as Dunkin', they do sell at least some of the products that we're considering selling. So another type of data that we can find is something like the total traffic in a 30-day average. In this case, we've got that data for 2023. So we're going to look for the total for fast food in 30 days. And it does show up here. So we can select that. And we see at the bottom of the table, we see that there's, in our target zip code, 449,240 people in an average of 30 days visit fast food restaurants. So as you can see, there's a lot of different consumer expenditure numbers that are available in SimplyAnalytics. Obviously, we focused on baked goods and coffee fast food, things like that in this video, but there's many other categories, industries, just a massive amount of consumer expenditure data available to research. Okay, so now we're going to look at how we can add more views and different ways to look at the data that we have here. So we're going to click on New View, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on each of these, but I'm going to look at the different views that we have here. So the first four are the ones that we defaulted to. We have those four over on the right-hand side. But now we're going to look at a ring study. So this is a way to look at data in different distances away from the central point that we're looking at. So we can look at these 4 points, we can hit done. And now what we're getting is a 1 mile, 3 mile, and 5 mile radius for the zip code that we have chosen, 43230, for each of those data sets. Now you will see that some of them will say NA, and that's because the data is not available in this format with that 1, 3, and 5 mile radius. Some data is not collected that way, so it won't be available to look at in this way, but that's okay. We do have a few things here that is kind of important here. It's nice to know the 1, 3, and 5 mile radius for the total population, and of course we can also then compare the bachelor's degree attainment as well. So that's how the ring study works. We can add more data to that and view a lot of different interesting data points in that way. Especially things like demographic data that will definitely should be available in that format. So the next view that we're going to look at is the business table view. There will be a more in-depth video on using SimplyAnalytics to research businesses in another section of this video, but for now I'm just going to show quickly how to use this view. You can use an advanced search here, or you can browse by business category. So with the advanced search, which I'll talk more about later, we can use things like industry codes, number of employees, and sales volume to search for businesses. We can also browse these business categories. So today, I'm just going to quickly look at this food services category here. We're going to look quickly at restaurants and other eating areas, eating places. And so we're going to look at these snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars, see if anything shows up here in this category in our zip code. So it looks like only one here, and that may be just a little bit of the sort of intricacies of using different databases. So we need to see what code actually our businesses are actually in here. So let's go back to this and restaurants and other eating places. And let's instead just look at limited service restaurants. This is probably going to pull up a lot more results for us here. And you will sometimes have to play around with this a little bit to see what code is actually the best code for doing some research. So this is taking a minute here. It's going to load for us and give us ideally a list of businesses here in our zip code, our target zip code, in that 722513 NAICS code. So from here, we now have this nice sort of spreadsheet format. We can come up to view actions here, and we can go to the columns where we can add more data to this table. Sometimes it will be blank because maybe they don't have that information for each business, but if there is something here that you want to include, you might as well check that just to see if that data shows up there. We can also click on export to export this as a spreadsheet. There may be some other formats as well, and you'll be able to just download that and look through that, format that spreadsheet however you'd like. And it looks like sometimes it may take a minute here to download depending on the size of the data, the amount of data. There's Excel, and then two other formats here as well, CSV. So the next view that we're going to look at here is the related data table. So this is a great table for looking at all of the data that's related to a certain data point that you want to look at. So if you want to look at total population, but you want to see any other data that SimplyAnalytics has that is related to that, you can select that data point. So we're going to go ahead, we've selected total population, and I'm going to hit done. And what it does here is it pulls the data that it has that is related to total population for those areas. So instead of just this total population 2024, it grabbed these other data points as well. And so there are a lot of reasons this can be useful. One use case that I'll look at later is for market segment data, where you can just select one type of market segment and it will pull everything, it will pull all the other market segments that are related to that one that you selected. That way you don't have to go and select, check every box for each different data point that you want. It just pulls everything related to it into one table for you. The next view that we're going to look at is the location query. So this lets us take data that we've selected and then find locations that match that data. So in this case, we've been looking at a specific zip code that we already know, or we've been looking at Columbus, things like that. We can actually do something like, we can look at the US as a whole and try to find cities that match the data that we're looking for. So this is not going to be necessarily related to the searching that we've been doing already. We could in some ways make that work, but in this case, I'm going to look for some cities with certain population numbers and education, etc., that match what I'm looking for. So we're going to start with a total population that is greater than 100,000 with an educational attainment greater than 40%, a median household income of 75,000, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit search here, and so it should find cities that match that. And so we have, I'm going to go down, we have 84 cities that match the specific data that we're searching for. So in our case, we've been searching specifically for data about a certain zip code or Columbus, and that's been great for a lot of our searching, but we could use this query for an unknown location. If we just know that we want to look for places that match certain data, we can do that search and find that location. Now, we could also do this specifically for maybe zip codes in Columbus that match a certain set of data conditions that we have. Really, it can be used in a lot of different ways. Another view that we have here is the histogram. So a histogram is going to create a type of bar chart that groups data into bars with X and Y axis. So here again, we're just going to use total population. I'm going to click on, well, we can use our zip code here. What this is going to do when I hit done is it's going to group all of the census tracts in our target zip code based on the total population. So we have our population number here. So what this means is that there's one census tract in 43230 that has a population between 0,000 and 2,000. 0 and 2,000. And then here, this tallest one, there's 7 census tracts that are between 4,000 and 6,000. And so that's how you would read that. If we wanted to see which census tracts those are, we could look at the ranking or the comparison table. We would just have to set it to compare the population number of the census tracts in our zip code. So a lot of ways this could also potentially be useful, and just another way to view some of that data. Our second to last view here is a bar chart. This is just sort of a standard way to view data. Again, we can look at total population. Actually, we should look at something that's going to have a better comparison here. So we're going to look at educational attainment. And here we see a classic bar chart that is in descending order, which happens to be our zip code has a higher educational attainment of a bachelor's degree or higher than both Columbus and the US. So just a standard way of viewing data, and could be a great choice for representing some of your data here. And then the last view here is the scatter plot. So a scatter plot requires you to grab multiple data sets, and then it allows you to kind of make a comparison there. So we're going to just do it this way, where we have this, we're going to look at median household income and that educational attainment. And what this would ideally do is let us see if there's a correlation between these two data points. So if I hit done here, we see this line here that is like the line that would represent a correlation between these points, but what we're actually getting is sort of this scatter shot across here. So you might need to look up some documentation on how to read scatter plots to see how our data is correlated, or whether there is any correlation between them. But this could be valuable, again, depending on what the data is and depending on what level you're looking at. If we back out a little bit and we look more, if we were to go to maybe zip codes in Columbus, we see a little bit more of a variation here along that line. And if we look maybe for the country, it's a little bit stronger looking when we look at the states in the US. So it just kind of depends. But again, you would need to maybe look up some documentation on the best ways on how to read scatter plots. Thanks for checking out this video. If you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to me by email at business@columbuslibrary.org or send a message through our website. Don't forget to keep an eye on the calendar on our website, where you can find all of our upcoming events, our Ask a Librarian sessions, and links to many more resources. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more content from the Business and Nonprofit Resource Center at Main Library. See you next time.